All right, so it's a little late here, but I think that by now everyone's aware that there are some individuals um, that have falsely predicted the way this election was going to turn out, um, and as a result, some people are, it seems, running to the opposite end of the spectrum. That is cessationism. And so I thought I would put out a quick video about my thoughts. First off, people who predicted this election and got it wrong are, by definition, false prophets. According to Deuteronomy 18:15 through 22. In this passage, God is promising to raise up a prophet like Moses. And then he contrasts that prophet like Moses, of course, is Jesus Christ. And he contrasts that with a false prophet that speaks presumptuously. And because that prophet speaks presumptuously, that thing does not come to pass. So not only in that passage are those who prophesy falsely called false prophets, but they're contrasted with Jesus Christ himself. You can also look back at certain passages in Deuteronomy 13 to get a better understanding of what would constitute a true prophet as versus a false prophet. With that being said, I want to address cessationism really quick, and particularly I want to address, this is a broad topic, and I just don't have time to go through and do an hour-long, 2-hour-long session on specific aspects of continuationism and cessationism. My own personal view is what's often called open but cautious. And so if you know what that means, then you realize that it's a more moderate view. Essentially, it's the view that it's not impossible for God to raise up someone with the gift of prophecy today or something like that, but we are to test everyone and everything that comes through. And we have to realize that not everyone who claims to be a prophet is actually a prophet. In fact, the vast majority of people who claim to be prophets are not. They just simply aren't. And that's why you have these excuses that, well, under the new covenant, God somehow changed the rules so that now if you prophesy and it doesn't come to pass, it's not really a false prophecy. We're just learning how to use this gift, right? I see nothing like that in Scripture. That says it's something that you learn, like you go to some kind of school and you just, like a class you take, right? I'm going to take this class and in biblical Greek, and so I'm going to learn how to read the Bible in Greek, and by the way, I'm taking this class in prophecy, so I'm going to be able to prophesy at the end, right? I don't see that in Scripture. I don't see a warrant for that. And I say all that to say this, that just because these individuals have missed these prophecies and are false prophets, therefore, that should be avoided, that does not entirely justify a swing to the other extreme in and of itself. And I want to address, again, just one argument that I've heard from the cessationist side recently that I think is just the most ridiculous cessationist argument out there. And it comes from Matthew 11. And so, there is a statement in Matthew chapter 11 that says, "For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John came." And that's it. That's Matthew chapter 11, verse 13. And that's the verse that this individual who put out a video, and unfortunately I couldn't find it right before making this. If I happen to find it later, I'll put a link in the description or in a comment to the original video. But the argument was essentially that this passage is not talking about John the Baptist, it's talking about John the Apostle, because we know prophecy happened up until John the Apostle. But afterwards, there was no prophecy, according to this individual. Therefore, this passage is about John the Apostle. Let's read this passage in context. I'm going to start with verse 7 of chapter 11. It says, "As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. 'What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John came, and if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. Let anyone with ears listen." And that was through verse 15. So, I actually challenged this individual on this particular understanding of this passage, and I pointed out that this is not talking about John the Apostle. And very clearly, if you put this in context, and this is why context is so important in biblical interpretation. Don't be a one-verse theologian. Don't base your entire theology around one verse of Scripture. That's a very bad practice to get into, right? That doesn't mean don't memorize Scripture and memorize important Scriptures. Of course, you want to do that, but don't base everything off one passage or use one passage to justify your theology. That's not how we're supposed to go to Scripture, right? So, this individual, whenever he was challenged on that, he basically argued, but there was prophecy after John the Baptist. And if we read this closely and look at the parallel in Luke 16, I'm not going to flip over and cite that. You can look it up yourself. There's a parallel passage in Luke 16. It makes it clear that it's talking about the Old Testament prophecy that points to Jesus that's in sight here. So all of the prophecy that pointed to Jesus specifically names the law and the prophets in Luke, right? Prophesied until John. Some versions say the law and the prophets were until John. That word "were" is not in the Greek, but my point here is that it's very clear that we're talking about John the Baptist, not John the Apostle. But the response of this individual was, well, we know there was prophecy afterwards. Well, all of this prophecy that's being spoken about here is the prophecy that points to Jesus. That's very clear when you read this in context. It becomes very apparent that it's talking about what directly points to Jesus. That's not to say that prophecy in the New Testament doesn't point to Jesus. We know, for example, in the book of Acts that Agabus prophesied. We have a very specific prophecy from Agabus. Um, we also know that the church at Corinth, um, as badly as they mishandled the gifts of the Spirit, they Paul writes to them, and it implies, in a pretty clear way, it seems to me, that the gift of prophecy was being used at the church in Corinth, and so um, a word from God, I believe, will always ultimately point back to God in some way. But and I think that would be the New Testament view. I don't, and as a side note, I don't consider, let's take a hypothetical that God were to raise up someone today with the gift of prophecy. That is not on par with Scripture. Scripture takes priority over anything else. Talking hypotheticals here, but we have to remember our foundation is Scripture, not what someone says God told them about us. I've gotten off track, but my point here is that this is why you don't want to be a one verse theologian. You really want to understand Scripture and context, and this individual just kept doubling down and doubling down that no, this has to refer to John the Apostle, because in his mind it has to be so that prophecy ended with the apostles. In his mind, it just has to be this way. So this particular verse has to refer to John the Apostle, not John the Baptist, even though the context says otherwise. And so I think that it's very important for us to learn from this. And the number one thing that I would ask you to remember from this is that you don't let your theology shape Scripture in your mind. And what I mean by that is not that you always come to Scripture with this like blank slate in your head, right? Of course, when we read the passages, we have to do we have to understand it in some way. We have to think through it in some way. But what I'm saying is that you don't bring your theological assumptions from your particular tradition, whether you're Wesleyan or Reformed or charismatic or something else, Catholic or whatever. You don't bring your presuppositions to Scripture and then look at Scripture and be like, oh yeah, here's a verse, it seems to support me, right? That's not how we do things. You don't bring your theology to Scripture and read it into Scripture. Rather, what you need to do is let Scripture challenge your theology. What you need to do is ask God, okay, God, if there is anything in this passage that would challenge my way of thinking about you, that would help me understand you in a deeper way, I need to know that. I need to know if my thinking about God is incorrect in some way, then I want to know about it. I sincerely do. And the correction that we have are the words of Scripture, right? Don't let theology dictate how you read Scripture. Let Scripture dictate how you do theology. And I think that's the most important thing we can draw from this. Again, my own view on this is that I'm open but cautious. That's why I talk in hypotheticals this time. I'm not one of those individuals who says, yeah, God has raised up a prophet in the modern days. I have yet to find someone that I think is authentic, but as a matter of biblical interpretation and as a matter of the theology that has grown from my understanding of Scripture, I see nothing in Scripture that would preclude God from raising someone up if hypothetically he desired to do so. And so that's why I'm open but cautious. But I would encourage us again to ground everything in Scripture. Remember that if someone is prophesying falsely in the name of God, you don't follow them. Don't pay attention to them. Don't give them the attention that they probably want. Right? At the other end of the spectrum, don't deny what's possible for God, because you have seen someone claim something and it turned out to be false. I think that those are the two extremes we need to avoid, and so that's where I'm going to leave this video. If you're following the channel, I have a plan to post more regularly in the coming probably couple of weeks, maybe a month, to have regular videos out, possibly daily or every other day for a short time. That's not going to be obviously a pace that I can keep up regularly, but be sure to check back, and if all goes well, I hope that we can all become familiar with the Book of Psalms together. Anyway, I am really going to leave it at that at this point. Thank you for watching. I wouldn't be a YouTuber if I didn't remind you to like and subscribe and hit the bell and leave a comment and do all those algorithm things. But I'll see y'all in the next video.